When your mother signs the document that erases your name from the family legacy without blinking, you realize you've been dead to her long before today. I stood frozen in the glass conference room of Lancaster and Company, surrounded by polished marble, chrome fixtures, and the faint scent of overbrewed coffee. The company logo behind my mother gleamed like it was mocking me, gold on white, perfect and sharp, just like her. She didn't even glance in my direction as she signed. One stroke, another, the final signature, mine, removed from the ownership papers. My stake dissolved, my name erased. My voice caught in my throat. "You're cutting me out?" My brother Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed behind his head, flashing me that irritatingly smooth smile that once charmed every investor in the room. "Don't take it personally, sis, it's just business. You know how it is." I turned to my mother. "You knew I was working on that expansion for months. You praised it." Veronica Lancaster finally looked up. Her expression was calm, too calm. "Sentiment doesn't belong in boardrooms, Ella." The walls closed in. The glass panels reflected me, perfectly dressed, hair smooth, eyes wide, but I looked like a ghost, already fading from this place. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream. I just walked. Down the hall. Past the assistants pretending not to make eye contact. Past the reception desk with its curated orchids. Past the display case of our newest diamond collection titled Eternal Lineage. Outside, the night was cold. City lights blinked above me like they were whispering secrets I couldn't decode. I climbed into my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Somewhere between the 22nd floor and the parking garage, my throat had closed completely. I didn't drive home, I just drove. Through streets I used to know. Past the cafe I'd studied in during business school. Past the Riverwalk where my father once told me, "You're different from them, Ella. That's why you'll have to fight harder." I should have fought harder. I pulled over near the waterfront. The city skyline shimmered in the black water like a mirage. I stared, unblinking, until the tears finally came, silent, steady. My family had chosen my brother, chosen legacy over loyalty, and I had let them. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember closing my eyes with a single thought. If I could just go back. And when I opened them, I wasn't in my car anymore. The early morning light leaked through silk curtains. The scent of jasmine from the diffuser on my nightstand filled the air. I knew this room, my room, but not the one I'd gone to sleep in last night. Not after losing everything. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. My phone buzzed beside me. I grabbed it. Date March 17, a full year before they took everything. I blinked. Once, twice. A dream? A breakdown? No. The emails on my phone weren't from lawyers or company board members. They were about an event pitch for our next spring line, a presentation I hadn't thought about in a year. I stumbled into the bathroom, flipped on the lights. Same face, same hair, same tired eyes. But this time, I didn't look like a ghost. This time, I was awake. I didn't move for a full minute. The sunlight creeping across the hardwood floors looked too soft to be real. I gripped the edges of my bedsheets like they might vanish if I let go. Phone, emails, calendar, March 17th, staff meeting at 10. Reminder to call the event manager. A text from Mom, brunch at the house, don't be late. Everything matched. I checked the news app, headlines I hadn't seen in a year. Fashion stock volatility, a scandal with a rival jeweler. Headlines I remembered. My hands shook as I walked into my closet. Everything was back. My old wardrobe, the shoes I had thrown away after that charity gala, the pale pink dress I wore to last year's company brunch. This wasn't a dream, this wasn't a breakdown. I'd been given something impossible, a second chance. I stared at myself in the mirror, touched my own reflection like I expected it to blur. "You've already killed me once," I whispered. "This time I'll resurrect myself properly." My mother's house hadn't changed. Of course it hadn't. The same iron gates opened silently as I drove through. The same manicured hedges. the fountain's centerpiece spraying like some ornamental reminder that money never stopped flowing here. The front doors were already open, of course they were. Veronica Lancaster made an entrance even in her own home. I walked into the dining room, heels soft against the imported marble floor. The long walnut table gleamed under the chandelier set for 3. Everything in this house sparkled, even the things that didn't need to. My mother sat at the head of the table, scrolling through a tablet. She didn't look up. Caleb lounged to her left, sipping espresso like it was an Olympic event. His shirt was open at the collar, his cufflinks gleamed, Lancaster sapphires. From the Oceanborn collection, ironically one of my designs. "You're late," my mother said without warmth. I checked the time. "I'm early." Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, calculating, but not interested enough to challenge the lie. "Early would have been 15 minutes ago. You know that." I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I sat down, lifted my coffee cup, and took a sip. It tasted bitter. Stronger than I remembered. "You look less dead than usual," Caleb said casually. "Sleep well, sis, or finally cut that sugar detox nonsense?" I smiled. "Just a little. Wouldn't you like to know?" His brows rose, amused, maybe even intrigued. In the past, I might have fired back or rolled my eyes. Now, I was watching him, watching both of them, listening not just to what they said, but to what they didn't. Veronica finally glanced up. "We'll need to review the second quarter pitches today." "I assume you're prepared, Ella." "I am." I kept my tone even, not eager, not timid. She stared at me for a moment too long. Not because I'd said something wrong, because I hadn't acted how she expected. "You're wearing lipstick," she observed flatly. "I'm trying red again." She didn't respond. But I caught the way her eyes narrowed just slightly, as if unsure whether to classify this as rebellion or marketing strategy. Caleb leaned toward me. "You've got something on your—" He reached out, index finger brushing the side of my mouth. I caught his wrist. Not hard, just firm. "I got it," I said, wiping the corner of my lip with a napkin. The pause at the table was brief. But I saw it, the flicker of confusion, a change, not much, but enough to be noticed, enough to start a shift. When I left their house an hour later, I sat in my car a while before starting the engine. Everything had been the same. Same brunch, same cutting remarks, same perfectly timed dismissal, and yet, everything was different, because I was different. They didn't know it yet, but I'd already seen the ending to this game. I'd seen how easily they'd chosen each other over me. How they'd signed away my future with the same ease they signed birthday cards. Not this time. This time, I wouldn't play to earn their love. This time, I'd play to win. The internal strategy meeting wasn't mandatory for me, not technically, which made my appearance there all the more surprising, for everyone else. I didn't go for the numbers. I went to watch the one person who'd always spoken the truth, even when I wasn't listening. Daniel Reeves. He stood at the far end of the narrow glass-walled conference room, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal his cufflinks. Plain, silver, not from any of our collections. Of course not, that wasn't his style. The others filtered in, nodding to each other, mumbling half-hearted greetings. Daniel didn't bother with pleasantries. His attention was on the thick packet in his hands. "Slide 22, he said as soon as the last chair scraped into place. "Let's start with the issue everyone's pretending not to see." A beat of silence. Someone coughed. Caleb wasn't here, thankfully. This was too low tier for his ego. I flipped to the slide, projections for the mid-market collection launch. Daniel tossed the packet onto the table. "These numbers are padded. Assumptions are weak. If we base a launch off this, we won't break even." The junior analyst who'd made the report visibly paled. I waited for someone to jump in, to push back, to make excuses. No one did. So I did something that even surprised me. I leaned forward, calm and clear. "What exactly is padded?" Daniel's eyes flicked to me. Just a flick, but I saw the hesitation. He hadn't expected me to speak, let alone ask. He tapped a line on the screen. "Here. Anticipated conversion rate. You're projecting 18%. That's higher than our holiday line. And this isn't backed by any market test, The analyst stammered, I thought the celebrity campaign. Daniel cut him off with a sharp look. Thought doesn't cut it, not when the margins are this thin. I turned another page. Okay, what should it have been? Daniel studied me for a second longer than necessary. I met his gaze without blinking. 13 maybe, he finally said. With evidence, real A/B testing, not a marketing intern's hunch. Would you be willing to show me what that kind of breakdown looks like? That did it? The briefest flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly smothered beneath that signature calm of his. I could, he said slowly. If you're serious, I am. Another pause. I could feel the attention in the room shift. They were used to me sitting quiet, to me letting things slide, playing nice, not anymore. Fine, Daniel said. After this meeting, conference room B. He didn't wait for small talk, just walked straight into the room, pulled up 2 chairs, and opened his laptop. The sun streamed through the high windows, casting angular shadows across the table. The city sprawled behind him, tall, fast, competitive, just like him. This, he said, is what we call actual forecasting, not wishful thinking. I sat beside him, leaning in to watch as he pulled up data tables, graphs, trend lines. He explained in clipped, exact terms, like he didn't have time to waste, like he was still waiting for me to flinch or nod politely and disappear. But I didn't. I asked questions, I took notes, I listened. Something shifted then, not in his voice, but in his posture. His shoulders eased slightly. His tone lost its edge. You're different, he said finally. I looked at him, half smiling. You say that like it's a bad thing. I didn't say worse, he said. Just, not who I remember. Back then, I said quietly, I dismissed you. Daniel didn't deny it. I turned to face him fully. Now I know. You were the only one who never lied. He stared at me, unreadable for a long moment. Then, truth gets you disliked in this company. I nodded. So does pretending to be someone you're not. He looked out the window as if considering something. Well, he said, standing, if you're planning to keep asking questions, I'll expect you to bring real numbers next time. I will. In the elevator ride down, we stood in silence. Not cold, not awkward, just observant. As the doors opened on my floor, I glanced at him. His voice followed me just before I stepped out. Red suits you better than compliance. I smiled all the way back to my office. The archive smelled like dust, old paper, and something metallic, like forgotten history and stale ambition. It was the one floor in the Lancaster building no one visited unless they had to. I never had, not in my old life. But I knew exactly what I was looking for. 3rd cabinet, 2nd drawer from the bottom, Q3 audit drafts, the ones that vanished in the future. I pulled the heavy drawer open and flipped through labeled folders. There it was. Handwritten notes, internal memos, early expense breakdowns that hadn't yet been sanitized for board presentation. One in particular caught my eye, a flagged entry for a vendor who was later mysteriously removed from our system. I remembered asking Caleb about that vendor once. He'd brushed it off with a smirk and something about streamlining costs. Right. I scanned the document quickly, heart racing. It was all here, and no one else knew it existed, yet. I took out my phone, snapped photos of every page, then slipped the originals into my leather folder and made copies in the tiny, flickering machine in the corner. Then I loaded everything onto a secure flash drive I brought from home, labeling it Q3, backup, personal. That was the moment I stopped being an accessory to my own downfall. As I left the archive room, the fluorescent light above me blinked again, buzzing like a warning. I didn't care. Let it buzz. Sebastian Cole always wore Italian shoes, spoke in moderated tones, and somehow made betrayal look like diplomacy. He was tall, clean-cut, and the kind of man who thrived in expensive silence. He was also sleeping with my mother. That I'd figured out only after the fact, when I saw how quickly he'd defended her during the hearing, how he'd forgotten to notify me of critical filings. At the time I thought it was incompetence, now I knew better, it was loyalty, just not to me. I found him in the executive lounge, sipping his afternoon espresso, scrolling his tablet like he owned the building. "Ella," he said smoothly as I approached. "Didn't expect to see you down here. I've been revisiting the archives." That got his attention. Slight flicker in his eyes, the faintest freeze in his smile. "Looking for anything in particular?" "Nothing urgent, just catching up on what I missed last quarter." I handed him a file, purposefully sloppy, the kind an inexperienced assistant might misplace. "Looks like this belongs to your office," I added, stepping back. Inside that file was a single-page internal memo with a fabricated mistake, just one digit off in a projected royalty payout. Enough to raise eyebrows, but only if someone planned to use it. I left it in his hands like a loaded gun. Now I just had to wait and see if he'd pull the trigger. Later that day, I entered my mother's office without knocking. It was a bold move, one I wouldn't have dared before. But now I was testing more than patience. Veronica Lancaster sat behind her desk, framed by navy velvet drapes and gold trim. Her office smelled like peonies and polished control. "Something you need, Ella?" she asked without looking up. "I wanted to ask about next month's licensing renewals. Some of the forecasts feel off." She glanced at me. "Then fix them. Would be easier if I had access to Sebastian's internal logs." That got her attention. Her gaze met mine, cool and steady. "Sebastian is our counsel, not your assistant. He's also very selective with what he shares." She didn't blink. "He protects the family. That's his job." I nodded slowly. "And who's protecting me?" A pause. Not long. But enough. "Ella," she said, tone clipped. "If you want to be taken seriously, learn when to speak and when to listen." I smiled politely. "Thanks for the advice." As I turned to leave, I caught the reflection of her watching me in the glass door, like she couldn't quite decide what game I was playing. Good. Because this time, I was playing to win. The boardroom felt like a mausoleum. High ceilings, dark wood panels, and those carved mahogany chairs that seemed designed to make you feel small, unless you were born to fill them. I wasn't born to fill anything. I was expected to smile, agree, and disappear. Not this time. Veronica sat at the head of the table, pristine as ever, her posture as precise as the diamond brooch pinned to her blazer. Caleb lounged 2 seats to her right, flipping through the investment packet like it bored him. Maybe it did. I was seated 3 places down, near the end, close enough to speak, if I dared. Daniel sat across from me. He hadn't acknowledged me when I walked in, but I didn't take it personally. He wasn't the type for meaningless glances. Veronica cleared her throat, signaling the start. "As you've all read," she began, "we're moving forward with the mid-market expansion plan. Caleb will lead the rollout, and we expect preliminary investment rounds to close by next quarter." She didn't ask for thoughts. Of course she didn't. But I spoke anyway. "Actually, there's a potential issue with the cost curve assumptions." Every head turned. Caleb tilted his head like I was a mildly interesting math problem. Veronica's smile didn't falter. "I'm sorry?" I flipped open the folder calmly. "The projected margin assumes a 12% cost drop on overseas manufacturing, but that model is outdated. Our newest vendors haven't guaranteed post-holiday rates." Silence. I met his eyes. I saw the revised model. The margin only drops to 10.2%. That's still risky given how thin we're cutting the budget. My mother's voice sharpened. "That's not your department." "No," I agreed. "But risk management is everyone's responsibility, isn't it?" Veronica's gaze turned to stone. And then Daniel spoke. "She's right." 2 words, calm, clear, like facts on a page. Everyone looked at him. He didn't look back, just tapped a finger on the sheet in front of him. "The margin projection is overconfident. She caught what you missed." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the recessed lighting. Veronica's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Caleb stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. I just sat back, quietly, and let that moment settle like dust on polished wood. After the meeting, I didn't expect him to wait. But he did, leaning against the wall by the elevator, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You took a swing," he said when I approached. "Was it too much?" His brow lifted. It was overdue. The elevator dinged open, but neither of us moved. "I've got a case file I was going to assign to one of the junior analysts," he said. "But I think it might suit you better." "What kind of case?" "A real one. Messy numbers, conflicting projections, needs clarity." "Is this a test?" He shrugged. "If you're afraid of failing, don't take it." I met his eyes. "Send it to me." He nodded once. By tonight, at home, I kicked off my heels and changed into leggings and an oversized sweater. My dining table transformed into a war zone of spreadsheets, highlighters, and one increasingly cold cup of tea. But I didn't stop. Line by line, I untangled the report, cross-checking vendor quotes, adjusting inflation factors, correcting assumptions. Somewhere around midnight, I realized I hadn't looked at my phone in hours. My apartment felt different that night. Not lonely, not cold. It felt real. I was working for something that mattered, not to prove myself to them, but to myself. Daniel had given me an opening, and I wasn't going to waste it. The numbers didn't lie, but people did, and often. I sat at the head of the long glass table in our central showroom, a place usually reserved for press previews and curated investors. Today, it hosted something more delicate, an internal negotiation to salvage a failing international contract. Everyone in the room looked tired. Except me. I had slept 3 hours, survived on espresso and adrenaline, and yet, I felt alive. I flipped to the last page of my printed breakdown and pushed it forward. If we pivot the European supplier contract now, and renegotiate the sterling clause before the quarter ends, we'll save just under $2 million in import taxes. Silence. Then, murmurs. Even Veronica blinked. Daniel, at the far end, gave a single slow nod. "She's right," he said. "And the margin corrections check out. I ran them." The VP of Supply cleared his throat. "But that would mean terminating our current partner." Caleb approved that vendor personally. All eyes turned to Caleb, who stood near one of the display pedestals showcasing our Legacy Diamond series. A collection I'd once pitched and he had taken credit for. He smiled without warmth. "We've already committed to that shipment. Canceling now could create noise." I didn't blink. Noise is better than loss, unless you prefer press coverage over solvency? His mouth twitched. A flicker of something. Frustration, maybe. But I didn't back down. The showroom gleamed under the spotlighting, every jewel encased in crystal like frozen power. I used to walk through here and feel small, decorative, replaceable. Not anymore. Now I saw it for what it was, a stage, and I had finally stepped into the light. Later I heard her. "She's planning something." I'd walked by the executive hallway and paused just before turning the corner. Veronica's voice, low but sharp, filtered through the open door of her office. "She's watching. Every move. She doesn't argue like she used to. That means she's calculating." I didn't hear Sebastian respond, but I didn't need to. I could guess. They were both uneasy. Because for the first time in years I wasn't reacting. I was acting. And that made me dangerous. I found Caleb waiting for me in the stairwell between floors, leaning against the railing like he owned gravity itself. "You're getting good at this," he said casually. "Clarifying financials? Stealing thunder." I tilted my head. "I thought you didn't believe in storms." He chuckled. "Funny. But you know, Ella, the more you rise, the higher the drop." "I've already hit the bottom," I said, brushing past him. "Everything else is just flying." I didn't wait to see his reaction. I didn't need to. The air behind me felt different, tense, unsettled. That was enough. Daniel texted me later. "Coffee?" 10 minutes. Lobby cafe. I found him already seated, sleeves rolled just enough to make him look more human than executive. The cafe was small, tucked between our building's lobby and the florist shop that always smelled like eucalyptus and memory. "You handled yourself well," he said without preamble. "Today." That was a real play. "Thanks." He sipped his drink, then looked up. "Do you know what they're saying about you? That I'm dangerous? That you've changed?" I stirred my tea. "Have I?" You're more focused, less apologetic. I don't have time to apologize anymore. He smiled. Just slightly. Whatever game you're playing, it's working. I met his gaze. What if it's not a game? He didn't look away. Then I hope they're ready. We sat there for a moment in something like silence, but it wasn't empty, it was charged. Like the pause before a storm breaks, only this time I wasn't the one standing in the rain. I was the one with the umbrella, and for the first time someone was sitting beside me under it. The restaurant had been closed to the public for the night, naturally. The Lancasters didn't dine with strangers, especially not when celebrating themselves. Soft jazz floated through the air, mixing with the clink of expensive glassware and the hum of polite, wealthy conversation. A custom floral centerpiece stretched the full length of the table, all white orchids and icy blue roses. The company's brand colors. Subtle. Expensive. Chilling. The annual Founders' Dinner was always like this, perfectly curated, insincere, and staged like a glossy magazine spread, and I had never felt more ready to ruin it. Veronica sat at the head of the table, radiant in her icy navy gown, the same shade as the velvet chairs in her office. Caleb was seated to her right, basking in attention like a sun-fed sculpture. Investors, cousins, old board members, they all laughed at his jokes and nodded at his vague promises. I was at the opposite end, technically part of the family, but just far enough to be easy to ignore, until I didn't let them. To Caleb, my mother said, raising her glass with that signature poised smile, "For securing our largest international contract this quarter, your father would be proud." Chorus toasts echoed around the table. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. I didn't lift mine. Instead, I stood. "Actually," I said lightly, while we're all celebrating, "I think there's something we should look at." The room stilled. Forks paused. One of the photographers instinctively lowered his camera. Veronica blinked once. "Ella, this isn't the time." "It'll only take a minute," I said, smiling. Calm, polite, practiced. From my clutch, I pulled out a crisp folder, slim, elegant, lethal. I slid it down the table, past half-finished steaks and handwritten name cards, until it landed squarely in front of Sebastian Cole. "Internal memo?" I said. "Confidential expense routing, including vendor kickbacks, and several off-the-record transfers to an unlisted shell company." Sebastian froze, just for a second, but it was enough. Caleb shifted. "What the hell is this?" Veronica's smile didn't crack, but her eyes sharpened like knives. "Ella, where did you get this?" she asked, voice dipped in velvet and venom. "I found it during a routine archive check," I replied. "Apparently I've been more hands-on this quarter." Someone at the table coughed. Someone else reached for their wine. I continued, voice still even. "The shell company is registered under a name connected to one of our former consultants, the same consultant Sebastian personally approved. Twice. All heads turned to the company lawyer. He recovered quickly. "These documents could be fabricated." "They aren't." Daniel's voice cut through the noise like a clean blade. Every eye turned to him. He sat, legs crossed, entirely calm. I reviewed them myself. Another beat of silence. And then Veronica stood. "That's enough," she said sharply. "This is a private dinner, not a courtroom." I looked at her, my smile now gone. "I agree. So maybe our counsel shouldn't be bringing us legal risk to the table." Caleb pushed back from his chair, standing like he might physically block me from going further. "Are you trying to humiliate us?" "No," I said softly. "Just reminding you I still remember what truth looks like." Veronica's gaze burned into me, not rage, not fear. Calculation. She didn't deny it. She didn't defend Sebastian. She just said, "We'll discuss this on Monday." Translation, "I'll find a way to contain this by then." But it was too late. The seed had been planted, and it had been planted in public, outside. After the dinner had mercifully ended, I stood on the cobblestone path near the valet stand, the chill night air washing away the perfume and pressure. Daniel approached silently, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't say anything at first. Then, finally, that was bold. I glanced sideways. "Reckless?" He smirked. "No, bold, a pause. He added more quietly and brilliant. I looked at him, truly looked. You believed me, I always did. Another pause. This one warmer. Then the valet pulled up with my car, and the spell broke. But as I opened the door, Daniel touched the frame lightly. You're changing things, Ella. Just be sure you don't forget why. I met his eyes. I'm not doing this to hurt them. He nodded. Good. Because hurting them isn't the same as winning. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the city light like he always belonged in shadows. But somehow chose to stand beside me anyway. The bar was tucked between two art galleries on a quiet side street, the kind of place with mismatched velvet chairs, old jazz records lining the walls, and candlelight that softened everything, even the truth. It didn't feel like somewhere executives met. It felt like somewhere you went when you were too tired to pretend. Daniel was already there when I arrived, seated in a dark red booth, one hand wrapped around a lowball glass, his tie loosened and jacket draped beside him. He looked, not relaxed exactly, but less contained. This place doesn't match you, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. That's why I like it. We didn't talk about the board, or the fallout from the dinner, or how Sebastian had apparently taken a leave of absence as of that afternoon. We just let it breathe. He signaled to the bartender for another drink, then looked at me carefully. You're not surprised. You planned it? Not all of it. But I knew what would happen once the right people saw the right paper. He studied me, then leaned back. And how long have you been planning anything, Ella? I ran my finger along the rim of my glass. I've lived this once, I said quietly. I didn't fight. I played nice. I watched them sign me out of my own name, and I let them. His brows furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I kept thinking, if I just did everything right, everything they expected, they'd choose me. And when they didn't, it broke something in me. Daniel exhaled slowly. So you came back to fix it? I shook my head. No, I didn't come back to fix them. I came back to choose myself. That silence, the good kind, stretched between us again. His voice when it came was softer than usual. It takes most people a lifetime to do that. I didn't have a lifetime, I said, half smiling. Just a second chance. We sat there a moment longer, letting the noise of clinking glass and low music fade into the background. Then, quietly, like he didn't want to spook the moment, he reached across the table and took my hand. Not for show, not for comfort, just to hold it. His palm was warm, steady, strong in that silent, grounding way only he could be. You know, he said, voice low, you don't have to do all of this alone. I looked at him, really looked, past the sharp wit and dry delivery and icy reputation, and I saw the man who had been watching from the edges, always with clear eyes, the one who never flattered, never coddled, and never turned away. I thought I did, I admitted. Well, he said, thumb brushing lightly against mine, you were wrong. For the first time in months, in years maybe, I didn't feel like I was standing on the edge of something crumbling. I felt like I was finally building something of my own, and I wasn't doing it alone anymore. The boardroom looked the same. The deep wood-grain table, the frosted glass, the antique chandelier that made the room feel more like an old estate than a corporate office. But everything had changed, because this time, I wasn't sitting quietly at the end of the table, waiting to be acknowledged. I was standing. And everyone was listening. I'd like to formally present evidence of a financial structure routed through 2 offshore entities, I said, placing the flash drive on the table, both of which are directly connected to Sebastian Cole and, through proxy, to Caleb Lancaster. Gasps were too crude for this kind of room, but the tightening of jaws and sudden straightening of posture said enough. Veronica didn't move. Caleb shifted in his chair. That's absurd. Daniel, seated to my right, now an official observer, no longer silent, replied before I had to. I've verified every document, he said coolly. They hold the chair of the board, Mr. Hampton, a man who once called me the flower of the family in a toast I'll never forget, cleared his throat. We'll need to go into private session to review the material. Of course, I said, meeting his gaze. But the summary is simple. Millions moved through unreported subsidiaries, both shielded by layers of legal obfuscation, one controlled by a private fund Sebastian created 5 years ago, the other by a shell corporation tied to a defunct vendor from our South Korea line. Caleb scoffed. You're fishing. I turned to him. I'm sinking your boat, Veronica finally spoke, her voice like cut glass. This company has survived worse than a disgruntled daughter with a folder. Yes, I said quietly. And it'll survive you too. Silence. And then Hampton turned to Sebastian, who was already paler than usual. Counsel Cole, he said. Effective immediately, we're suspending your access to all internal systems and legal privileges, pending external audit. Sebastian opened his mouth to object, but nothing came out. He stood, straightened his tie with unnecessary precision, and left without another word. Caleb followed him seconds later, slamming his folder shut. He didn't say goodbye. 2 hours later, I signed the reinstatement documents, official, unanimous, legal. The Lancaster board now had a new chair in waiting, and her name was mine. Veronica didn't leave after the vote. She stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city as if she could still control it by sheer force of will. I walked up beside her, not because I needed confrontation, but because I didn't. You've won, she said flatly. No, I replied. I stayed. Her jaw tensed. You think this makes you stronger than me? I think it makes me stronger than who I used to be. A long pause. Then she looked at me. Really looked. I underestimated you? For a long time, I said gently. So did I. She didn't offer a truce. That wasn't her style. But when she walked away, she did it without malice. Just silence. That was enough. Outside the boardroom, Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded. He raised an eyebrow as I approached. Well? It's done. He offered a nod. You didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. A pause. Then, and now? I looked out past the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city buzzed below, alive and ruthless and full of possibility. Now, I said, I decide who I want to be without them choosing for me. He smiled, not the smirk, not the polite version, a real one. I think she's going to be extraordinary. And this time, I believed him. The lights dimmed. Then, the stage bloomed into gold. Soft instrumental music drifted through the room, not loud, but warm, like breath on glass. The audience leaned forward as the first model stepped onto the runway, adorned in sleek black satin, her neckline bare but for one piece, a single gold necklace, sculpted to look like a vine curling out of broken stone. Revived. That was the name of the collection. The concept was simple: resurrection, rebirth, reclamation. Metal forged to look like it had once been shattered, gemstones set in fractures instead of frames. Nothing perfect, nothing pristine, everything real. It was the first time I'd ever designed a collection not for press or profit, but for myself. Applause rose around me like waves. Flashbulbs popped, investors smiled, and editors whispered things I didn't need to hear to know they were impressed. I stood off stage in a tailored dark green suit, the color of forest after rain, and watched it all unfold. Not as someone desperate for approval, but as someone who finally didn't need it. From the corner of my eye, I saw him, Daniel, not in his usual place, not behind the scenes or seated in the row reserved for directors, just near the back, watching, no tie, no badge, no clipboard. Because this was his last day. He'd submitted his resignation 2 weeks ago. Not because of me, because he said it was time. I helped keep the walls standing, he told me, but they're yours to rebuild now. And he'd been right. I didn't need him to stay in the company. I just needed him to stay in my life. The show ended to a standing ovation. The models circled back for the final lineup, the theme of revival echoing in every angle of the stage. Backstage, assistants buzzed around with notes and schedules, but I moved through them like quiet in the middle of chaos. I didn't need to say much. My work had already spoken for me. I stepped outside into the early evening air, heels clicking against the marble steps. The sun was just beginning to dip below the skyline, throwing streaks of amber and lilac across the glass towers of the city. And there he was, waiting by the curb, hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable, except for the way his eyes softened when he saw me. "You didn't stay for the after-party," I said as I approached. "I'm not great at parties." I smiled. "I noticed." He tilted his head. "You're not bad at them. But tonight, you looked like you belonged somewhere else." I glanced back at the building behind me. The glass, the gold, the reflection of everything I'd once thought I needed to become. Then I looked at him. "I thought I had to prove myself to them," I said quietly, "to earn my place, to be chosen, and now? Now I know who I am." His smile was slow. "Sure. And that," he said, stepping closer, "is the only thing I ever needed." He didn't kiss me. Not yet. He didn't need to, because when he reached for my hand, I reached back without hesitation. We stood there as the sky melted into twilight, not rushing forward, not looking back, just being. Ella Lancaster, daughter, survivor, partner. And finally, herself, not defined by what they gave or took, but by what she chose. And she chose love. She chose life. She chose her name.